Alrighty. Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
How about now?
Now I can.
All right.
You can hear me?
Yes.
It's almost like we're doing a Zoom call here. Look at this.
Almost like that. You know, the funny thing is, I think there's powers outside of ours that are trying to get us not to talk about these things.
6 weeks ago, 6 months ago, that would have sounded like a crazy thing to say. But you know what? Any day, these days, you never know.
It's absolutely crazy. You know, I'm glad that we were able to connect. I mean, you've been doing a lot from your end. I've been doing everything I can from my end. And I think the public really needs to get a better understanding of a lot of stuff that's been happening, both upstate and downstate, and all the efforts that have already been put into them and how we can continue these efforts.
I agree.
You weren't at the I don't know what to even call it, demonstration or
rally demonstration. No, I did not make it yesterday. You know, I mean, everybody's got kind of their own take on how they're approaching this, and I respect, you know, all opinions. I don't agree with all of them. You know, the folks that had joined yesterday, they were kind of, you know, showing up to say, hey, you know, we want to let you know that we're still here, and you know, we understand that we're under these pressures, but we're still here to pay our taxes. As many, you know, anybody that's watched my videos knows that what I'm pushing back on is I'm telling, you know, if government's going to force me to house people for free, then they should be picking up the tax bill. It's part of what started my video series really is when I hit a point late last year when I looked at my losses and realized that they had surpassed my entire property tax liability on my entire portfolio for the year. And that was just kind of a breaking point for me when I said, okay, you know, I've been struggling to try to find a way to get, you know, how do I get, you know, on track? And it just became quite clear that I was off the tracks. And that's when I started kind of my individual push for some restoration of sanity to the whole situation, which is, you know, not anywhere in, you know, in sight, but it's at least what I was attempting to do.
You know, I'll give it A for effort from a lot of the people. They're like, I think that one was I think we spoke about it. It was demonstrated by a guy Ben Hart. I think his intentions were right. At the end of the day, I think it just came down to not being able to hit a point with their efforts. You know, I think personally, I think I said this to you before that they would have probably been better off coming there with a bunch of IOUs in their hands, handing them over.
That's my opinion, but you know, it's one of those things. You know, it's a double-edged sword. You know, unfortunately, many housing providers, we've been so busy trying to grow our business, you know, fix properties, keep them maintained, you know, keep units occupied, that we have not traditionally set aside the time for any advocacy. We weren't, distracted by that, and probably wrongfully so, because there are a lot of other powers out there that were very much focused on collaborating and rallying, probably to our detriment. Obviously, I think is proven with the passing of the Tenant Protection Act, which it doesn't really protect tenants. It makes for an easier path for bad tenants, but really the people that are suffering the most right now are good tenants, and there are thankfully far more good tenants than there are bad tenants out there. So, there were some powers, I think, that were kind of collaborating in that realm, and we have not traditionally done a good job on our side. But so I welcome the chorus of voices. Like I said, I certainly won't agree with every single one of them. I don't even agree with my wife on everything. We've been married 10 years today, right? So, it's like,
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm a lucky guy. But at the same time, where I may disagree with someone else's approach, I'm glad that the voices are out there, and at least it's adding to the chorus of us that are trying to really, I think at the end of the day, try to restore some sanity. And really the term I like to focus on the most is accountability. There's got to be accountability for housing providers, and there's got to be accountability for the tenants. And without a balance of accountability, we see what we're seeing now.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we're tackling, and at the same time, another thing that's a problem, because historically, as landlords, we're kind of self-reliant. We're not really used to having to rely on groups and other associations to do what we need to do, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of times landlords become landlords, because they kind of like take things on their back and just do it and get it done. This situation that we're dealing with is completely different than any other time that we've ever come across, because of the fact that in this point in time, in this point of history, no matter how hard you work and no matter how much effort you put into it on a singular level, you're not going to accomplish anything. And that's one of the fears and one of the things that I believe that where I'm seeing as far as a obstacle and pushback from a lot of landlords of not paying their taxes, because of the fact that they're afraid that the state is going to seize their properties. And it is a
fear.
It's almost fear mongering right now on the state level, because they have that in their back pocket. And if it's a handful of landlords that are doing this, like 100, 200 landlords, 500 landlords that are doing this, that's a blink of the eye for the state. They're not even going to care.
And the state's not even really the entity that's going to experience the pain from it. And really, the reality of it is, even the entities, these tax collecting entities, in my case, and where the properties that I own in the city of Rochester and in Monroe County, those are the two local tax collecting entities. So, but the reality is, even if I don't pay those taxes, somebody's going to come in and pay for the tax lien. They're going to be kept whole. I'm going to be the person that's possibly down the road without my personal property any longer, because I failed to pay those property taxes, whether it's by choice or by circumstance. I mean, I would prefer to just be paying my property taxes, but what I'm doing is holding back, and I'm making some adjustments in the portfolio. And on the properties that I'm going to be selling, I'll pay those taxes at the time of closing, tap some of the equity in those properties to shore up, a smaller portion of what I've originally owned. But yeah, it's quite frustrating, and it's disheartening, because it's really, if you look at the data shakes out that the people that are being impacted the most by this are the small landlords.
Yeah.
I got into this personally because I wanted to create housing opportunities for that first rung of the ladder. There's all sorts of places one can invest dollars. You can do high end, you can do vacation. Me and my business partner, Mike, and we got into this and started with rooming houses, identifying that there was an immense need for people coming out of prison. They were on probation, rehab, or coming out of rehab, out of homeless shelters, and tried to create the most affordable housing units as we possibly could. And we were quite successful at it. And then the Tenant Protection Act came in, and that group of people are oftentimes the ones that aren't worried about getting a judgment. And, they're not worried about long-term ramifications. Oftentimes they're in that position because there's a history of other maybe things that have plagued your life, right? And now they're looking to get some stability in housing so that they can try to build themselves up again. But, that Tenant Protection Act ripped away all of our recourse or any meaningful recourse. And that's the segment of housing that's getting hit the hardest, is the most affordable housing. And that's what I find disheartening about it.
That act that they pulled off, what was it, in June 2019, pretty much crushed a lot of people. Not only did it crush a lot of those small landlords, it kind of, without people realizing, it hurt a lot of segments of the tenant population as well. And I don't think they realize. I want to dive into that a little later on in the show.
Sure.
But the one thing that I want to kind of put out there and kind of give everybody an insight and understanding, I strongly believe, and I feel that real estate and property ownership was truly one of the few true ways to be able to achieve the American dream in this community, in this society that we live today. It wasn't that way 50 years ago, 40 years ago. At other times in history, you could do other things as well to be able to get to that point. But I feel like in the way our economy is built right now, and the way that everything's very volatile. Paper is volatile. You have people investing in Bitcoin. You have people investing in the stock market. You could have shares of Tesla today. Those shares of Tesla today could be worth 2 cents tomorrow, and may or may not be the truth. But I'm saying it's paper. It's perceived value. Mm-hmm. that we're basically trading right now, and that's what the economy is based off. And the one last tangible asset and economic type of investment that was out there was real estate, because
I agree.
You can actually hold it. It's a tangible, viable asset that has a use.
Right. Well, and it's like I often explain to people, that's literally one of the oldest, easiest paths to wealth creation, right? And you can come to this country, and I've spoken to many people. My wife is an immigrant. I've spoken to many immigrants, especially now that I've taken up the advocacy on this front. A lot of folks down your way, immigrants that came here, they don't necessarily know the language very well. Maybe they're low skilled, but they understand the concept. If I can put my money away and I can buy a piece of real estate, the rents are going to cover the business, the costs. Hopefully I'm cash flowing a little bit per month. Maybe it's an equity play. Maybe I don't cash flow a lot, but at some point in the future, I will own this piece of real estate, this real property, and I can hand it down to my kids. I can sell it and distribute the funds. And if you're taking away, people's ability to do that, you're hurting a group of people that maybe don't have the skills to go out and build a technology company and take it public, or some of the other things to what you're speaking of, other paths of wealth creation that are far more difficult. So we're undercutting people that can least afford to be undercut with all this. And the narrative is that it's just a bunch of big fat cats out there, and it's white guys that own all the property, and it's so far from the truth. And I feel like that narrative is doing such an injustice to people that have really, a lot of folks have scratched and clawed their way into getting into real estate, that live in the concentrations of poverty that they own the property in as well, because it's their path out, or at least their path to giving, their family a little bit of an edge against what they maybe historically have had, access to. So, and even the city of Rochester's data supports that. They did a data analysis last summer. I'll send it to you in a PDF if you want to take a look at it. But what it shows is that the people that own the least number of units are the ones that are most impacted by evictions. And the types of properties are singles and doubles, which are your most affordable rental property. So you literally you're creating a system that's hurting the people that own the least and own the least expensive property, which is your person that's trying to get on that path of wealth creation for themselves. It's not the guys that own 3,000 units in 2 different buildings or something crazy. So they, this narrative gets put out there to almost shut the conversation down, and it's dismissing a huge segment of property owners out there that can least afford to be hit. And really, who's benefiting from that is when these people go under, or they can't keep it up anymore and they've got to sell it. The people that can afford to buy it are the people at the top that can absorb the losses. So we're literally empowering the very people that we claim are the ones that we're hurting. And it's really frustrating to watch the dialogue because it's so dishonest.
It's extremely frustrating. And at the same time, you kind of hit something that actually is really close to home to me. as far as talking about the immigrant psychology, because real estate and property ownership truly is that one path that is achievable by anybody that's coming to this country.
Agreed.
You know, because my parents, they came here in the 60s. My father came in the 60s, my mother came in the 70s. When my father came here, he basically had two nickels. Maybe he had two nickels, maybe he had a nickel and a penny that he could rub together to get himself started. He started as a dishwasher, and over years, he, with hard work, saving, he ended up accomplishing opening up his own business, and slowly started to buy some property. Now, back then, he used to go crazy because he didn't know how to understand how all the laws work, especially here in New York. It's really tough, especially if
Different
you're coming
world.
in from a different country that has a different psychology of how landlord tenant rights are and how it is here. So he was at the point where he was going to be giving up on everything and just start liquidating everything. And when I was in my teens, I basically jumped in and started helping him, starting to understand the laws and guidelines, and that's kind of what was my jump start into my real estate career. But if it wasn't for that opportunity to be able to get involved in real estate and to do things, what would have happened? What was he going to do? Was he going to be taking whatever money he's making and putting it under his mattress, or
Mhm.
maybe putting it into his IRAs, which
Right.
a couple times in his lifetime have deflated completely, and his heart dropped and his stomach had knots in it,
Oh yeah.
knowing that everything he was saving was gone. But no matter what, the one consistent that always was there was those bricks. You had that building that was there, or that house that was there, that at worst case scenario, let's say everything went haywire and he lost everything. At least he has that house or that property that maybe he could move to if worst case scenario.
Exactly.
And that's being lost over and over again. And the whole thing of painting a white brush over everybody and classifying who your typical landlord is, I think that's really wrong. And it's a really a form of discrimination, a class discrimination, and um, you know, perceived class discrimination, because it's one thing to discriminate against somebody because of what they are, and it's another thing to think to discriminate because what you think they are.
Right.
And everybody thinks we're something, but we're not. Not necessarily what the public has painted us as, and it's a tough solution. And one of the things, like, I've taken this really even if I wasn't a landlord, just because I'm so involved into the real estate community. Obviously, I do sales just like you. Congratulations on your new listing, by the way. That was a
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.
Um, if if I was just doing it on that level, or I was just doing property management, it still affects me because I'm looking at all these landlords coming to me, and I get calls on a daily basis saying, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. I can't I can't pay all these expenses, and I'm not getting any rent. And they're not letting me evict the people. And you have people that are putting themselves so much in debt right now,
Mhm.
trying to get themselves afloat. Where's that money going to come from? And that's one of the reasons why, like, I get a little over the top. I mean, I wrote Eviction Moratorium in my background right now. Who's going to pay? I even made a T-shirt about it because I'm like, just like, I'm getting a little nuts with this thing, because it really affects me personally, and I see how many people that are affected even worse than me. You know,
Absolutely.
I still say thank God that I'm able-bodied and I'm able to work. You saw that story about the guy in the Bronx that had a 10-family house that he has Alzheimer's, and they're sending him foreclosure letters on because he
Exactly.
can't cover the
Well,
expenses.
and I've talked to some of the folks, because I've had folks reach out to me from down your way, and I mean, the pressure on your real estate's far, it's much different than it is up here in Western New York. I mean, people that I mean, I say I'm fortunate, and to your point, we're both fortunate. We have something else we could do to earn an income. But I've talked to some folks that, that the only way they were ever going to purchase a home for themselves was to buy a 2 or 3 family. Now that's something, when I'm dealing with first time buyers, it's one of the first questions I ask. Have you thought about buying a multifamily? Live in a unit, rent out the others, you offset your mortgage, start that wealth building, that wealth creation for yourself. But for a lot of the folks, especially down your way, where real estate's so much more expensive, some of these folks, they could never afford to buy a single family home for themselves. So they buy a 2 or 3 unit, they live in one, they rent out the other. So not only are they at risk of losing their investment, but this is in their own home as well. And when I heard those stories, it made me feel, I feel fortunate in a way, even though I'm, going through what I'm going through, because there's for every bad story, there's one that's 10 times worse out there. And I got into real estate as well. I was in telecom after I got out of the Navy, came back to Rochester where my family was, and went through a couple of layoffs and reorganizations and said, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to get into something I can own. I want to own my career, own the product that I sell, and the product now is me. It's not a bag of products that I carry out and try to jam down somebody's throat, right? So, and then to start buying real estate. But I'm also passionate about helping other people acquire real estate, whether it's their own single family home that's going to be a little bit of wealth creation for them, or if the people that want to invest and really start to build a business out of it. I think it's wonderful. And especially in a place like up here where you've got a concentration of poverty within the city limits, starting to be able to create ownership in that community starts to reverse that, or to take these pockets that are a concentration of poverty and start to inject prosperity into them, and individuals that are experiencing prosperity can help to lift that community up. I think most people would agree, if you drive down a street full of rentals and down a street of owner occupied properties, oftentimes they look very different. There's something, when you own your property, you feel that you own that property, you own that street, you own that neighborhood. And if you've got a concentration of owners, you've got a situation where you've got a good, healthy community. And I would love to see more of that up here. And, unfortunately I had to react last year, and I ended up selling off 15 of my single family homes that I had acquired the year prior. And my goal was to hold on to them for a few years, wait till they were paid off, and then turn around and offer the opportunity to tenants that maybe couldn't qualify through traditional lenders to acquire that property for themselves, to hold the paper on it, hold the mortgage, do a rent to own. Let me help structure something so that when I go to exit this property, instead of just selling it to some other guy that's got 1,000 properties, let me create 15 new homeowners. But that opportunity was totally ripped out from underneath me and those possible homeowners, because I had to make a decision. Am I do I hold on to properties that I'm losing my ass on, or do I turn around and start selling some of this stuff? And that's how I've had to react to it. And I know a lot of people are having to react that way. And then, of course, when I sell them and an out-of-town buyer buys it, now I'm exporting wealth from the community, because those rents, instead of being spent here with a local property owner, now they're going to get exported to somebody in a faraway place. So, the dry cleaner, the restaurant, all that doesn't benefit in this neighborhood now, because the money that could be getting made here is getting made elsewhere now. It's really pushing the trends in the wrong direction, at least up this way. I'm sure you guys are seeing it, down there as well.
It's a tale of two cities. It really is, because
yeah, it is.
The thing is, you get special treatment just for being in New York. Just like everybody in New York State gets special treatment. In the city, you really get that extra special treatment. It's one of those things that we're basically looking at why are we getting penalized just for being in New York more than anybody else? And that's the thing that is the most disheartening thing. There's not a widespread type of way of looking at housing throughout the country. Every state takes on their own type of approach to it, which I don't understand that approach. I think there should be something that's a lot more uniform and a lot more conceivable and understandable for people that want to be involved in the housing. But I like the approach that you took as far as giving people the ability and the incentive of actually becoming homeowners themselves as far as a tenant. Did you want to talk to, a little bit about how you went about doing that? I mean, that's a really great incentive to give some tenants.
Well, I think, I pay attention to politics. I tried running for city council up here in 2010. I ran as a Republican, which, they haven't elected a Republican in the city of Rochester since I think a couple of years before I was born, right, in the late 70s. But because I understood that, living in a county that has a concentration of poverty within it, people can complain about the taxes in the suburbs, but where are those tax dollars going? They're going into the concentration of poverty. So you got two options. You can sit out in the burbs and complain about it, or you can go into the concentration of poverty and try to make a positive impact, right? And so what's, again, one of the easiest forms of wealth creation is property ownership. So if you look at a concentration of poverty, a majority of it's rental property. And now, as much as I'm, a housing provider, I want a healthy environment. I want a healthy community. So I would prefer to see a majority of houses in the city of Rochester be owner occupied, because I know that if they're owner occupied, it means that there's an underlying mindset and certain things are happening that people need to be doing in order to be an owner and not a temporary resident in a particular place. So I didn't win the city council election, obviously, and so then it was.
You might have been fortunate.
Probably to a degree. I mean, I'm sure it would have been hitting my head against the wall. But then I said, okay, how can I turn around? What can I do next to try to make a positive impact? And that's when I got into real estate. And then in doing that and in speaking with people I knew from the time that I tried to run, understood that, a big problem for people that are trying to, get out of poverty oftentimes is, people that need stable housing. It's hard to have a job. It's hard to have, kind of the rest of your life in order if you don't know where you're going to sleep at night, right? Like you got to have that. It's hard to think about having food to take home if you don't know where home's going to be that day, right? So I said, okay, well, what's the most affordable housing? And so we started with, rooming houses essentially, and creating these affordable opportunities for people to find a stable, secure, safe place to live. And, I've got a ton of success stories out of that. People that came out there were on, parole, a guy that had been in jail for 30 years and he came out and, 2 years after living in one of my rooming houses, he's getting himself established. He's got a job. Then he's moving into a 1-bedroom apartment. I hated to lose him as a tenant, but I was thrilled to see that progression of this guy who came out with nothing. Nobody wanted to give him an opportunity. And then boom, he's got some stable, secure housing, which gives him some semblance of normalcy. And then from there, he can launch and try to find a job. And then he can take that and make some money and save some money and then get himself into a better apartment. So, that's the kind of stuff that I want to do. I want to do that because otherwise you're just sitting out in the burbs complaining about how your taxes are going up. So if, a lot of people do that, but my attitude is instead of running away from the problem and complaining about it, run towards the problem and try to find a way to fix it. Now, I don't have all the answers, but I know that housing is something I can speak well to. I've been around the industry. My mother's been selling it since I was 2. So I've been around the industry for a long time. And to the point of what I was trying to do with the single families was, okay, I acquired them from a guy that had owned them for a number of years locally. He was on his way out. He was in his 80s. He wanted to retire. So I acquired them. And unfortunately, the Tenant Protection Act came in and a handful of the residents in those started saying, hey, it used to take you 6 weeks to get rid of a non-paying tenant. It's now going to take you 3 months. I'll take my chances. And then the moratorium hits and then it just really goes to crap. And I'm not an independently wealthy guy to where I could afford to carry these things indefinitely. So I had to make a choice. And the single families are the least profitable investments to own because, right? So it was like, okay, I had to look at holistically at the portfolio and say, what do I do in response to what's going on? Do I try to keep these things afloat? And there was some good paying tenants and some not. So I had to package them up and I sold them. And some guy downstate bought them I don't think he's ever been in Rochester, probably never will. That's no offense to you guys down there, but that's the reality of it. So he's got no connection to those tenants where I did, especially the good ones. Some of them had lived in the property for 9-10 years. I said, you know what? Wait till I get to a point where I've paid these things down or paid them off. And I'd love to extend the opportunity. If you can prove a track record of rent on time and you're taking care of a place, I would be thrilled for my exit strategy to be you, Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, being the new owner of this place. Somebody's going to own it. I would just assume it go to the person that's living in it and who's cared for the place. One of the single families I did keep, and because the tenant in there was on the cusp of getting, her credit was just about where it needed to be in order to qualify for a traditional mortgage, because I have a mortgage on the property. I couldn't extend owner financing. So, I looked at her, I said, you've been in this property for 10 years. I've owned it for a few now. You've been a fantastic tenant. You take care of the place. You pay rent on time. She's pleasant. So I took her to the local bank. I took $300 out of my own pocket. And I said to the bank, get her a secured credit card. She's starting to use it. She's been a month into it now. She's got Credit Karma on her phone. She's watching her score starting to go up. And my goal is that probably within the next 5 to 6 months, her score is going to get up to where she needs to be. She'll qualify for an FHA mortgage, and I'm going to sell her the property. And that will honestly be one of the biggest successes I can imagine. I don't stand to make a ton of money on it. I'll probably it'll be about a break even. But just to know that I can take this person who is now on their second housing provider in the same house and extend to them that opportunity to become a homeowner, because now that woman's going to start to create some wealth for herself, and then her kids following behind can hopefully tap in on that someday when she either decides to sell it or she leaves it to them or what she's going to do. But that's a seed of wealth creation that I can plant and nurture as a housing provider. And people don't see that side of housing providers. They think it's just, we're trying to drag every nickel we can out of it, and we're here to take advantage of people, and we like throwing people out on evictions. I love long-term tenants. That's my goal.
Absolutely. That's the biggest myth that exists as far as landlords just want to evict people. They want you to be there for as long as humanly possible.
Yeah. I would be thrilled to tell the story of, I bought a house and this person was living in it, and 10 years later, I turned around and sold it to them, and they're still there, 10 years from now. That to me is a huge success. And those are the things that we can create as housing providers. The private sector can do that if kind of left alone to do so and not be destroyed by people that claim that they want to see, they claim to be housing advocates, yet their solutions seem to just make it worse for everybody.
Well, the officials could actually take a form of what you're doing right now on your own and give incentives to some of these small landlords to actually do things like this. And that's an amazing type of mindset. I mean, what you're doing is remarkable. And I think you're really paying it forward to somebody else. As far as you had an opportunity, you're giving somebody else an opportunity right now to be able to get themselves to the next level. And I think that, these kind of things should be looked at and studied in a way where we could actually help the situation instead of hurting the situation. And that comes kind of almost to where I wanted to kind of take this discussion as far as solutions. Because right now with the eviction moratorium, we've been, hollering and yelling about how unjust this is, which it is. And, we're not necessarily being treated properly. But at the same time, what are the real solutions right now? Because the truth be said, there's a ton of debt right now that's left out. We don't have to only worry about the people that are affected by COVID, because some of the money that is given out right now through the latest stimulus program that they're going to be helping with rent relief, it's going to go towards those people. But what happens to the people that are playing the system right now? Well, I'm sorry to cut you off for just 1 second, but I just wanted to finish this thought on this, because we have people that have really been playing the system, and they have been not paying for rent well beyond before this coronavirus pandemic even hit us. And because of these eviction moratoriums, haven't been able to move out. And I've had it on a couple of occasions, and I know many hundreds of people that have other situations where people have just gotten up after swallowing up 10 months of rent, handing over the keys and saying, I'm out of here. You can come after me with a judgment.
Well, so I look at this problem as deeper than the moratorium. I think personally, when I look at the thing holistically, the Tenant Protection Act created the foundation for something like a pandemic moratorium to be abused. It's simply put, when you look at, we were stripped as housing providers, a lot of the ability that we had to do due diligence to vet properly, a new tenant was kind of ripped away from us. And certainly on the backside, in the event that someone either decided to be a holdover or a non-payer, and most of the time, if someone's choosing not to leave, they're also not paying. They don't often stay as a holdover tenant and continue to pay rent, at least not my experience. I'd love to find someone who's experienced something different than that. The recourse that we have was meaningless to a certain group of people, not to everyone. But if you're the kind of person that doesn't care about having a judgment on your record, then it's basically the Wild West. Go for it. Don't pay rent, because that's really the best that we're going to end up with. So what I've experienced, is when the moratorium hit, or when COVID hit, some of my tenants I knew were impacted financially big time. And I went to them and said, look, I'm a human being. You're a human being. My goal is to keep you here in this unit. A lot of these tenants, most of my tenants were people that were living in the properties prior to my purchase. It's always my goal to keep people. So I said to him, look, we're going to find a way through this. I'm hoping that there's going to be aid provided. I'll help, get you connected with it. Whatever whatever the request is going to be. If you need some documentation, some assistance from me, I'm with you. Let's do this hand in hand. And I do have people that are months behind on rent still, and but they're coming every week with $100 or $120. Like they're trying to get caught up, and I'm willing to work with them. I have not lived a privileged existence where I've never been paycheck to paycheck in my past, right? I've had, years, especially, I was younger, where it wasn't, lucrative. I've experienced what it feels like to have a money constraint. And if it comes down to someone feeding their kids or paying for the roof over their head, the kids got to eat, right? So I get it. What I was disappointed about was that the biggest abusers, in my experience, were people that were on SSI, SSDI, DSS, these non-garnishable wages. So if I even do get a judgment, they're never going to be impacted by the judgment because they don't have a wage that's able to be garnished. And that's where the abuse lies. And now if the premise to the whole moratorium was we can't be throwing people out on the street in a pandemic who've been impacted financially, I agree with that. I'm adhering to that without a compulsory action from government. I'm choosing not to evict people that have been impacted financially. But they're not doing any due diligence to confirm that the people that are not paying rent have in fact been impacted financially. The courts up here, I don't know about down there, but Rochester City Court, they allowed us to start eviction proceedings. I want to say it was October. I could double check my notes. And then they immediately turned around and did auto adjournments on them for 60 days. And then immediately following that came out and adjourned them indefinitely. And my thought was, well, fine. If you want to tell me that the whole premise of this is because people are impacted financially, then let's go to court, have them provide documentation proving they've been impacted financially. And you know what? I will, as their housing provider, choose to stop that action. If they can show up to court and prove to the court, because they've chosen not to prove it to me, that they've been impacted financially, I'll halt the action. But if they haven't, they get these people out of there, because what they're going to do, to your point, there's a lot of people holding a lot of debt right now because of all this. What's going to happen? There's only one way for housing providers to increase revenues, and that's to raise rents. So who are the rents going to get raised on? They're going to get raised on all the good tenants that stuck by in all this, because those are the people that are still left in their housing units. So it's the premise was put out there, and it was never followed up on to make sure that we were actually confirming people were impacted financially. And that was the whole premise. We can't throw people out of their houses because they had a downturn in wages. I totally agree, 100%. But let's get them into court and confirm that, because without doing that, you're just allowing for a blanket abuse of this moratorium.
I'm gonna actually point something out with this whole situation, and I'm just gonna work off of my own personal situation because I can't speak out for the public.
Sure.
But I have heard stories from other people as well. I have tenants that have truly been affected by the coronavirus. They've truly lost their jobs. They got sick themselves. Their families got sick. And my heart goes out to them. Obviously, we're going to have to do everything we can to help each other.
Sure.
Do you know that those tenants are the ones that are doing taking the biggest efforts to try to make good?
100%.
They're the ones calling me and saying, Nick, I got $100.
I agree.
I got $200. I know I don't have it all. I do my best to catch up. I just got unemployment. I'll give you a little bit from the check. I'll do whatever I can. And, sometimes I'll tell the people, catch up when you're ready.
Mhm.
You know, because you know, if they're telling me I'll give you $50, that's all I have, and they still need to put food on their table, I'm not going to tell them, deprive your kids of food.
Totally agree.
But at the same time, them offering $100, $200, $300, whatever the case is, to try to make themselves as whole as possible, and they're making and just not paying, and
Mhm.
that's the thing. That's the worst thing. It's blatant. It's not as it's a hidden thing. It's a very blatant type of situation where a lot of people are just defiant to pay the rent because they just don't have to, and that's a major issue that I think needs to be addressed. And then I'll give you another scenario going back to the 2019 laws as far as everything that has been turned on top of the head. One of the classified one of the classes that is protected, as you know, is illegal aliens, people without documentation, that kind of thing. Now, here's a problem I'm having right now with this moratorium. I've got illegals inside an apartment. They don't have paperwork. They brought in a whole bunch of other people that I don't even know who they are. I can't evict them. And here's the thing, even when I do evict them, how are you going to go and get a judgment? Even if I was going to get a judgment for them to actually pay me back,
I get it.
how am I going to get a judgment on somebody that doesn't even have a social?
It doesn't exist technically. Yeah, they don't have an ability to be traced. Yeah, I totally get it.
How's that work? That's just like it's a little bit crazy. I mean, it's one of those scenarios where damned if you do, damned if you don't. And how do we deal with that? I don't know. It's a tough scenario. Do you have a lot of those issues happening where you are?
I have not experienced any of that myself. Thankfully. But I've heard the stories for sure that it's happening. Or people that I've heard some housing providers that have tenants that maybe they're collecting SSDI, and we all know that contractors this last year have been insanely busy. Almost, I don't know any tradesperson that's not busy. So a lot of these guys that are collecting SSDI are working cash under the table someplace else. A lot of them are making more money now than they were making. Corona's been the best thing for some folks. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but it's true.
Yeah.
And what I find in my experience is to kind of piggyback on your point, the people that have been impacted for real are the ones that are working the hardest to get caught up. And you know what? And that's the type of person I would be, and I'm sure you would be. If we were, impacted negatively, we'd be trying our butts off to stay on top of it. But what I'm finding is that people that are abusing it are almost antagonistically doing so. I mean, I've had stuff happen, people that are not paying rent, and then they stay there for a handful of months and they disappear. I had one, thank God I owned the double next door to a single family. I'd rented the single family out. She had lived there for a while. I had started an eviction proceeding on her before the moratorium because, her part of her rent was paid from the county. She had to pay the other half, was not paying the other half. Finally took her to court, was going to evict her. She showed up and paid off her portion. The judge says, okay, she could stay there. And then immediately the next month stops paying her portion again, of course, and the moratorium kicked in. So I was left, what can I do? Well, thankfully I own the double next door because several months into the moratorium, I get a call, hey, Rich, I think so-and-so moved out next door because we haven't seen anybody over there for a few days. Thank God they called. I went over there, looked through the window, everything's gone. I opened up, they left the bathtub, the water, like full blast, just running in the bathtub for no reason at all, right? So I got like a $700 water bill because it had been running for God knows how many days. And I'm thinking like, okay, so you lived here for free. Like on the way out, you got to kick me in the ass as well. Like just take your wins and go. Like, what do you got to like rub, salt in an open wound on top of it? But I'm seeing I see a lot of that kind of stuff where it's like people, it's like, I don't know, maybe it's displaced guilt or something, but they like turn around, they want to they punish you on top of not paying for months on end. It's like, it just doesn't make any sense to me why that's happening. But I don't know, maybe it's something in human nature I don't understand.
They won. They got away with not paying all that rent. Mm-hmm. In my definition, that's winning. They won. What do you need to kick the dirt on the person after you win after that? I mean, it's, you have stories like that. People of doing similar things to what you're talking about. Other people throwing concrete down the toilets and the sinks.
Oh, yeah.
That's common. breaking the sheetrock, which is the least they could possibly do. If it's only sheetrock I got to deal with, I could live with that.
Oh yeah.
Well,
the other thing too is, I don't know about how you guys are down there, but we up here, we have like these, like we call them the net office. It's like a neighborhood office. There's a couple different districts around the city. And if a tenant's got a legitimate complaint about a property, whether it's, safety issues, pest infestations, if they're not being addressed, they call the net office and they'll send a city inspector out and they'll come out and take a look at it. And if the landlord, if the housing provider is not upholding their end of the bargain, they'll stick a violation on it. If it's not resolved, they'll fine you. Well, what I'm finding is a lot of folks, for some reason, they think if there's violations on the property that they're not going to be held accountable for the rent for the time. So they're like I have one that was like, she keeps stealing the smoke detectors out of the place and tossing them out. Well, the new units are like $50 a piece because, you can't have the battery ones anymore. You got to have the all encompassing 10-year. So they're like, the city keeps calling me. And I said, like, guys, how many times do I got to put smoke detectors back into this house? Like, you were here 3 weeks ago. You saw me put them in. She's calling saying that they're not in there again. Like, I'm not going in there in the middle of the night stealing them. So but there's like well, let's create violations. And I think that some of these tenant advocacy groups are convincing people like, well, if there's violations on the property, you don't have to pay rent. So they're creating safety issues like smoke detectors or busting stuff up or breaking a window or not cleaning up so that they get these pest infestations. And then they're thinking that this is somehow going to relieve them of any responsibility for paying any of the back rent. I feel like saying to them, there's nothing that's going to make you pay it anyway. I'm going to get a judgment that you don't care about. Just leave it at that. Don't break stuff on the, while we're doing this as well. But there's a lot of misinformation out there, and then people are acting on that misinformation. And I think really at the end of the day, it's going to create just a lot more poverty for people too. A lot of these folks that are going to end up with judgments, if they were the kind of person that may have had the ability to buy a house or something at some point down the road, now they're going to be saddled with this big judgment because somebody was in their ear saying, don't worry about it, don't pay the rent. And now they've got just another obstacle to overcome, try to do something for themselves later on in life.
Well, what do you think? I mean, do you think this is all artificial type of animosity that's being bestowed upon both tenants and on landlords by our officials? Because that's the impression I'm getting. You would have a lot more healthy type of relationships between landlords and tenants if things were more black and white. You just mentioned something in regards to people not paying because there's a violation. Well, by law, they're actually supposed to be putting money aside in the escrow account if they're deciding not to pay the landlord, and until it gets rectified, and actually take an action to have that shown if it's something of that severity. But that's not being done as well, and there's not even a slap on the wrist for somebody for not doing the right thing from the tenant side. Now, you said there's a little offices that are popping up all over by your area.
It's the city inspection offices, and I'm glad that they exist. I'm an advocate for accountability on both sides of this. I don't think that it all needs to be one side or the other. Not all landlords are bad. They're not all good. Same thing with tenants. There needs to be a vehicle for accountability to be on both sides of it. What the Tenant Protection Act did is it yanked all of the accountability out on behalf of tenants, but saddled housing providers not only with more accountability, but also forced us to fly blind on a lot of this stuff. Like you literally can't even ask someone if they've been evicted before now. Like, how on earth, so you're going to tell me it's going to be more difficult for me to evict people, and I can't ask people if they've been evicted before. So you're going to create a permanent group of people that are habitually evicted. It's just like,
well, don't you think that's a double standard?
I think it's just removing of standards. What I find,
I think it's a double standard, because think of it like this: if you're buying a house, the bank has every right to ask you and look into if you've been foreclosed on or evicted.
Sure, of course they have, because they're not going to take the risk of placing their trust in you to repay a debt if they don't think that you're going to be able to pay it. And how do you determine if someone's going to be able to do that? By looking at past behavior, right? There was a point I was just going to make, and it just totally escaped my mind.
Sorry.
But I think just accountability in general needs to be reintroduced to it. There was not as much accountability. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So I've had discussions with, because I'm one of these people that doesn't shy away from discussions with people. I walk into a meeting knowing I probably vehemently disagree with most of what they think. I'm even happy to sit down across the table from people that I know hate me for who I am. They hate the fact that I'm a white landlord, right? And what I'm finding is a lot of the advocates are out there and they spread information and misinformation. But if you get to their underlying goals, and some of them are honest enough to admit it, they don't like the idea that there's profit in housing. They don't like the idea that a guy like you or me, or anyone for that matter, can go out and buy a property, risk some of their own capital, and create some cash flow for themselves and replicate that process over and over again. They don't like that. So I used to say it, after the Tenant Protection Act, I said, this is intentional. They do want to destroy landlords. And people laughed and they said, oh, it sounds conspiratorial, but it's not. There is actually a push in the advocacy community, the tenant advocacy community, that wants to destroy private property ownership. They want to destroy profit in housing, and they want to run guys like you and I out of business. They don't seem to have a plan for what comes next, but that's what their desired goal is to ruin profit in housing. They don't like the capitalist nature of housing providers. And so when you recognize that, it starts to make a lot more sense out of all this stuff, because let's face it, if you've got a huge group of property owners, it's harder to fight all those individuals than if we can concentrate the property ownership. So where the smaller landlords, and proven by the data, shows that the smaller landlords are going to get hurt, they're going to have to sell those properties and bigger entities are going to absorb them, then it shrinks that pool of housing providers, which makes it easier for those people to attack. If you've got 5 people standing up versus 1,000 people standing up, it's easier to beat up the 5. Now, they might be bigger entities with higher powered attorneys and everything else, but so it sounds conspiratorial, but honestly, I think that is the intention for a lot of this stuff. It's done under the guise of advocacy for tenants. There's a racial aspect that's introduced to it to silence conversations like we're having from happening. And the unfortunate nature is it's going to hurt the very people that they claim to be advocating for, because the reality is there's a good segment of people that are not going to own their home, unfortunately, and some by choice. And those people need good quality housing, and government can't provide it all to them. And the advocacy groups, I even called them on the carpet. I said, look, if you guys think that you can do it better, buy a couple of my houses, run it, show us how this is done, show us how no profit in housing can operate, democratically controlled housing. Take my houses, I'll structure the deal, I'll help you, I'll even give you some assistance for closing costs. Let me empower you to become the owner and show us how it's done. Maybe you do have a better model for how we can do this in the future. And not a single one of them has taken my offer to buy any property that I own and show us how they can implement getting rid of a guy like me is going to make things better. So the goal is destruction.
That's actually something that I presented a couple of times, as far as, okay, so the city, the state, they're saying that, things have to be conducted this way. They're basically mandating how horrible we are at what we do. But the thing is, they're also changing the rules along the line. Like a lot of us, when we first purchased, the laws and the rules were a different way than what they are now. So the rules they keep changing. Like, what was the Roddy Piper? Remember Roddy Piper, the wrestler?
Vaguely, yeah.
Okay. He used to say something, just when you think you have the answers, I change the questions.
It's true.
So that's exactly what's being done to us. So I've actually turned around and said, oh, okay. So if that's the case, okay, you don't like landlords. Cuomo doesn't like landlords. De Blasio doesn't like landlords. You could address on how your locals like them or don't like them. I'm sure they hate us too.
Not doing us a lot of favors, I'll tell you that.
So if you're going to take it from that approach and you don't like us, you don't want us operating, okay, take our properties, everything that we all own, buy them back at market value, and you run it.
But don't you guys have the problem downstate that the publicly owned housing is the stuff that's in the biggest disrepair and everything else?
Bingo.
So, I mean, we don't have that as much up here. We don't see like you guys do down there. But I mean, from what I hear from people I know that live down that way, they say, yeah, the public housing is the worst housing, which So how, in that the things that the city will fine you as a private property owner for exists in their properties without any recourse at all. Is that
Well, they
correct?
can't find themselves.
Right. So,
So basically, it's a money grab. I really believe it's a money grab from landlords, from our agencies, our officials that are trying to basically squeeze every single last penny they can out of us on every level. And I also feel that it's a control situation, because if you control the property owners, if you control the housing completely, you control the votes, you control the population in different ways. Now you can say I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'm not. I'm actually a real optimist, and I try to look at the best scenarios. But in this case, it's blatantly obvious to us. We're not necessarily in a scenario where we have solutions. And that's kind of where I want to take this segment right now. Where's the end game? What are the solutions? How are we going to go about this?
it's a great question, and I'll be honest, I don't know, and which is kind of the scary part, right? I think to kind of piggyback on that last point for just a moment, if government came in and took over all the rented property, say in the city of Rochester, if city council came in and said, we've passed a bill, we're taking all your properties back. Those properties generate property taxes. Those property taxes fund schools, they fund the city government, they fund all that, right? The city would not tolerate people not paying rent on properties they own if they know that money eventually has to go back to paying the salaries for, sanitation employees and the city inspectors and city council and the mayor's office in providing all the funding for the city needs. And the reality of it is our properties do pay those bills. That's without our property tax revenues, these local municipalities can't exist, literally cannot exist. So in a way, I would love to say, fine, why don't you guys take it over for a year and see how quickly you're going to open the courts up if somebody chooses not to pay rent when it's the city receiving it directly, as opposed to waiting for it to filter through me and then back to property tax. Sorry, my phone's ringing there. So yeah, in a way, like if they ever actually achieved what they want, they would have a very different attitude about the balance and the accountability in the relationship between those who own the property and those who are renting the property. So in a way, it's like, what's the goal? What's the fix to this? It's, in a way, it's like you almost have to say, like, the fix is they've got to know what it feels like for a little while, but there's not a way to make that happen, right? There's not a way, because, to the point I made earlier, if I don't pay my property taxes, they're going to sell the tax lien. Somebody else is going to pay for it. And, hey, what's the worst happens? Rich is out, Rich didn't pay his taxes on a handful of properties. And this guy paid for the tax liens, and then he forecloses on it. And now Rich owns it. And, heaven forbid, even if the city or the municipality were to foreclose on you for taxes directly, now they're going to take a property that they got back for a year's or two's worth of taxes. They're going to turn around and sell that property. They're going to make money on that. So in a way, it's like, we're disposable. Yeah, okay, fine. It didn't work out for you. Too bad. We'll put somebody else in there, and we're going to keep doing what we got to do to keep getting votes. And the reality of it is there's more tenants in a lot of these municipalities than there are housing providers. A lot of the times the housing providers don't even live within the municipality. So the very people that enact the laws are voted for by tenants, and the housing providers, unless they want to shove money into an account, into a campaign account, they have no say. They don't need us. What are you going to do? You can't vote for me. You can't vote me out of office. And the tenants can, and we're gonna do what we need to do to keep those votes coming in. Especially in New York State, you could stay in office for 20 years. It's a very nice place to retire from, and that's I think that's the problem. The inherent issue that we have is the people that are on the hook for paying for it all are the people that are the easiest to dismiss.
And unlike California, we can't recall our governor.
No, unfortunately not. But boy, wouldn't it be nice to try?
I would love to see a campaign like that happen.
I'd love to see how he's explaining. I love the explanation on the nursing homes, right? We lied to the government because we thought they were trying to catch us lying to them. Well, yeah, it's fantastic. That's really fantastic.
Yeah, it's just like the same response that Cuomo gave when people are saying, "Well, what about the people that can't work right now and they want to?" He's like, "Go get a job." Like I mean, come on, it's ridiculous. It's sad on different levels. It's frightening on a different on a completely different spectrum that we've never been accustomed to in this country, at least in recent years. Um, and you know, if you are pro capitalism, which this country was built on, the notion of being pro capitalism, then real estate and home ownership and housing is a pivotal and substantial part of that uh, economical movement for a capitalistic country. And if you take away that ability, what's next? It's very difficult to understand of why they're trying to fight people that are actually providing a valuable service, of a noble service, something that's of true value to the society.
And
You
it is a
know,
foundational need, right? I mean, that's the thing that frustrates me is, I look at this, there's kind of like a two ways to look at this is we have a constitutional right to private property, right? Thankfully, whether it's your car, it's your television set, it's a house, we have a constitutional right to private property. And then we are housing providers. I've almost walked away from the term landlord, even though I know that that's generally what people understand us to be, because as oftentimes in our political environment, a phrase gets polarized and then it becomes something that it's really not, right? But we are housing providers. We provide housing opportunities to people via our personal property. So there's the mantra, that housing is a human right. Okay, well, you need food before you need a house, right? If you're starving to death, it doesn't matter where you go home to, you're going to die, right? But I can't go into my local grocery store and fill up my cart and walk out and say, well, food's a human right, and not have to pay for it. I'll get arrested in the parking lot if I don't pay for the food on the way out, right? Absolutely. I can't go into a restaurant, sit down and order a cheeseburger and a beer at 25% capacity, and then walk out the front door without paying for it. I'm going to get arrested in the parking lot for stealing. So why is it that this private property, because all that is someone else's personal private property that they have a constitutional right to, before I exchange an agreed to monetary sum to then make it my personal property? So why is it that this type of personal property is the one that gets ignored, where there's basically a legal right to steal it? Now, I know that the government, saying is that, well, we haven't denied you the ability to collect rents. We've simply delayed some of you. Well, at some point, a prolonged delay is essentially a denial. I mean, especially when people can pick up and move and there's no recourse left, that was a denial of my ability to collect. So I don't understand how they could trample on the constitutional right that we all have to our personal property, or just compensation in exchange of it.
see, it's funny that you just said about the denial. I'm just going to reflect to now this current moratorium that we're dealing with. We got, I mean, a whole bunch of other stuff that's, is a prelude to this, but just on the eviction moratorium, they're denying us our right to be able to collect income or to be able to take any action for not being able to collect income. But the thing that makes it very unbalanced is the fact that they have, in addition to doing this for the tenants, which again, the people that are affected, they should have some type of protections and they should be helped in every way they can. They're not doing everything to help us in a way where they should be. Why are we still mandated to pay our property taxes and there's no alleviation to that? When you're telling us that we can't, if we could provide documentation and proof that our income has been reduced considerably and sometimes completely on a certain property due to your actions, not because we decided this was going to happen, due to your law and your mandate, why are we still required to pay the state taxes? Why are we still required to pay what? I don't know how the water bills are in Rochester, but I'll tell you something, in New York City, they are a disaster. They're almost like another tax altogether on there. And it's not water, it's all sewer. But anyway, that's another story for another time. But you have to pay that. They're not putting mandates to Con Edison as far as they have a moratorium on utilities. That's a public need, you know, or the gas companies, National Grid, or numerous other items.
Right.
You know, they're not putting a mandatory moratorium on phone bills. We still have to have a phone. We still have to pay our cell phones and take the calls from the tenants stating if there's a problem with the building or if there's a problem in the house to take care of it. That's not even starting on the maintenance that we're still required to do. Right. And here's the other thing. If somebody is purposely destroying the property, either because they're mentally defective or they're being vengeful or whatever the case is, and you have proof of that, why can't you evict that person? They're basically assaulting you indirectly by doing that. Oh,
I totally agree. I had a case where, well, I still have a case. I've got a house that who knows how many guys are living in it now. It was I had rented it out to 4 roommates. I think now they're up to like 8 or 9 people living in it, and they wanted to create violations in the city. So one of them was going into the electric panel and like unplugging stuff and then calling the city, oh, there's electrical problems over here. And I went in and I said to the city, I was like, can you just put a vacate order on this property? I go, you can see what's going on here. Oh, there's nothing we can do about it, but you got to get this issue fixed. I was like, what, you want me to send an electrician in here to chase after the problems that you can tell that they're intentionally creating, but there's no recourse. To answer your question is like, what is the solution? First of all, I think a lot of the problems in a lot of levels of government would be solved by term limits. 2 4-year terms and you're out. And then you don't get these people that linger around for 4 generations in office that are never impacted by the legislation that they actually pass. But more so than that, I think, unfortunately, what's going to happen is, as with most government solutions, this thing needs to end in a ball of fiery mess. The thing needs to crash and burn. And then they need to see the impacts of what they did. And then the conversation can start for fixing it. And I say that because I think there's 2 things that we're going to see happen. Well, there's one thing that's happening to me, and there's something that I know is some other housing providers are doing intentionally, is the number of available housing units in concentrations of poverty are going to diminish immensely through one of 2 things. Like right now, personally, the Tenant Protection Act increased vacancy rates a little bit, whether it was true vacancies, people not living in a property, or people choosing not to pay rent, but it's a vacancy on the balance sheet, right? Well, then the moratorium kicks in, and now that goes up even higher. So when you have your actual empty vacancies and you're losing revenue, you don't have the revenue to fix those empty vacancies up. So they linger, and then as more vacancies occur, the revenue's not there to fix those units. So you've got housing units that are sitting empty simply because the housing provider doesn't have the capital to reestablish them as ready, active housing units. So I was, normally you run 5, 6, 7% vacancy rate. I'm probably right now north of 20%. And that's in combination with actual physical empty units. And then the other ones, which are even worse, which is a unit that's functioning like a vacancy because there's no money coming in on it, but the water bills are still going up. There's still electric being used on the ones that I have to, that I don't have separate utilities on. So those are housing units that are currently not available in the market. And who knows how long until, especially the truly empty ones, get back online. Now, the other thing I'm seeing is people that are in a position. I had a conversation with a gentleman the other day. He owns a couple doubles on a street that he owns. He owns a single family and owns a few doubles. He's in his 70s. He's lived in the neighborhood his whole life, and he's got no mortgage on him. He worked over the years and bought one and paid it off, paid it off. And so he's owned these things free and clear. He's so disgusted with the whole circumstance in New York right now. He said he went out and got a part-time job doing deliveries like Uber Eats and that kind of thing to pay for the taxes on them so that he can keep them empty, because he doesn't trust putting anybody in right now, because he knows he doesn't have the backing of either the local municipality or New York State in the event that someone goes south on him and he can't get rid of them. So he's making a calculated choice that it's painful either way, but it's cheaper to keep my units vacant and sit on them until I see something change because I don't want to put people in that choose not to pay and then damage it or run up the water bills and everything else. So what's going to happen is once at some point, I hope we're going to be able to actually evict the non-paying tenants and people that are acting poorly. Those people are going to be back out in the street looking for housing units. Well, now that we can't ask for things like previous eviction, housing providers are going to raise their standards. I want to see a good credit score. I want to see this. I want to see that you earn enough that, like they're going to set their criteria, whatever they feel comfortable with. And you're going to have a ton of people out there looking for housing that are not going to be able to find it because people have either raised their standards or the housing units simply are either not being made available or can't be made available yet due to lack of capital. And that's when the crisis will be. And then government will hear from those people saying, oh, we've got a crisis, we've got to do something. And then they'll quick, oh no, what do we do now to fix this? Well, what you do is you bring back accountability and you make people whole that you depleted of resources. My feeling on this thing is whether it's the Tenant Protection Act or the moratorium, if government is going to tell me that I don't have the ability to evict someone who's not paying rent, whatever the duration of time is, you want to tell me it takes 3, 6, 7 months now, fine. Then you got to step in as the government and pay for it. Because I guarantee you, if they were on the hook for paying for people that claim that they can't afford to pay for it, they would have a damn good due diligence system in place to confirm that they were not wasting government resources paying for someone's rent during a period of time in which they tell me that I can't evict them. That would be fantastic. I know the government will never agree to that, but that's something that I'm going to keep advocating for. You want to tell me it takes, it used to take 6 weeks to evict a non-paying tenant. The Tenant Protection Act, at least here in Monroe County, made that a 3-month process. Fine. Then you know what? New York State or whoever's dictating that, come in here. This is what their rent is. You pay their rent. And then when you allow me to get to court and find out what's really going on here, if they in fact can't pay the rent or are choosing not to, then let me evict them. And if they can, then you got duped into paying their rent for however long you forced me to house them for free.
Absolutely. I mean, and the other part of that situation is not only the fact that they should be covering the amount of time that they're forcing us to take on those people, but things should be reverted back to actually allowing landlords, housing providers to be able to get their legal expenses back as well, because that's another thing that we're dealing with as well. We're paying for attorneys. In many cases, they don't have an attorney. They're getting public assistance.
Well, the letters that come out from Rochester City Court that adjourn everything, hey, we've adjourned your court date indefinitely. If you're a tenant that's in need of legal representation, give us a call. We got your back. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. Why don't I get that same offer? What? And here's the other, I don't know about how you guys have it down there, but in Rochester City Court, if you own your properties in an LLC and not in your immediate name, you're forced to hire an attorney. You cannot legally go. I had to jump on a Zoom call a couple months ago, and I jumped on myself because I had a guy claiming he lived in a unit that he was supposedly subletting from one of my tenants. And I said to my tenant, who is this guy? I don't know who he is. He's trying to, scam the system. I said, I'm not paying my attorney. So I showed up on the Zoom call and got yelled at by the judge for showing up myself and not hiring an attorney. Not once did she have a question for me or what would have been for my attorney. Not once. And I was able to articulate what was going on far better than my attorney could. And she was angry at me for showing up on the call. And I said, well, why can't I represent myself? Well, if you want the protections of an LLC, then you have to hire an attorney. I said, why? Let me show up and represent myself. If I do a poor job at it, then the tenant's going to be that much better off. But they force you to hire an attorney while they're giving away a free attorney that's paid for, and guess what? Property tax revenue that comes in. So I have to pay property taxes on a unit I can't collect rent so that person can get a free attorney to come back and argue with me in court at some point when they decide to open them up again. It's lunacy.
There's definitely a lot of twisted logic that's connected to this.
Or a lack thereof.
Well, yeah, lack thereof logic, twisted mindsets. I don't know what to call it, but it's definitely a major problem that is ignored completely. And the thing is, everybody's trying to get a fair shake, and everybody's trying to say let's keep everything going on a very neutral and fair level for everybody. But that's not the case. It truly is not. I mean,
it won't be recognized until there's a big fiery mess at the end of all this. And then they're going to say, oh, wow, what did we do? And hopefully one of two things will happen. Either government's going to get wise and say we need to restore some accountability, or they're going to triple down on the lunacy, and then they're going to make it even, they're going to like, well, I've heard people floating the idea of a vacancy tax. So if you got a vacant unit, we're gonna penalize you for having it vacant. Now, it may just because you don't have the money to fix the unit up and get it going again, but they want to. So they're either going to double down and go down a crazy path, even a crazier, or I hope that through conversations with people like you and I and some of the other folks that I'm working with in advocacy, that they start to say, wait a minute, we need to turn this ship around a little bit, and we need to restore accountability. I want accountability for both parties. I want good landlords and I want good tenants. I want good landlords because a lot of those housing providers are people that own my neighboring properties. I want them to be good because if their values are good, if they're taking care of their properties and they're in good shape, it helps everybody's property value.
Well, not only that, if they're not doing the right job, they're making our lives a lot more difficult because everybody's always going to take the worst case scenarios.
Of course.
You're going to find the person that's the complete slumlord, the dirtbag human being that's treating people awfully. And that we're all like that. We're not supposed to be stereotyping, but we're being stereotyped as well. And then same way you have a lot of the tenants that are like really nightmare tenants. And then the good ones are paying the price for them as well. So it's a back and forth. My fear and my problem right now is how many of us have to become collateral damage until things get so bad that they have to somehow reverse things. Because I have no doubts eventually there'll be a change of momentum and a change of way things are happening. It happened in the 60s, 70s, where they were giving incentives to landlords to take on, dilapidated places, distressed housing. And, they were selling places in Harlem in the 70s and 80s for $1, entire buildings, to get people to call and rehab them and do the right thing by them, just to get more housing out there. So there's a way of how the pendulum swings and how everything goes full circle. The question is, how much longer will that be before we can find a solution, and how many of us will end up being collateral damage to this experiment? We'll call it an experiment that everybody is participating in.
The saddest thing that I think we're going to see, and we're not going to see it until it's all over with, quote unquote, over with, is I think a lot of the collateral damage is going to be the very people that were just getting a foothold into doing this, right? The person who scrimped and saved and finally bought that double down the street and said, I'm going to now start something for me and my family. And those people are often not the voices that are heard from because they don't have the big, they don't have the big entity behind them to force being heard, right? They're not the big donors. They don't have all the high-powered attorneys behind them. So what's going to happen is local governments are going to start to see, wait a minute, why is there another concentration of ownership in these rental properties? I think, unfortunately, this is going to impact the concentrations of poverty most. You talk to housing providers that have upper income properties, they're not running into these issues as much. It's impacting, the affordable, housing is, it's often, said not easily defined, or lower income housing, but I'll just simply say the housing that's in these concentrations of poverty, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, and portions of New York City, right? The landlords that own those properties are going to be the ones that are going to take the fall first. We're going to see a big shift of ownership in concentrated into fewer hands, and then the cities, and then everybody's going to be upset that it's absentee landlords and and then you might start to see the shift. But unfortunately, the people that are going to be impacted the most are the people with the least amount of power, the people that have bought the most affordable rental property, that have the lowest rents. So those voices are going to get totally shadowed and ignored. If this false narrative that this is only impacting, white landlords persists, it's totally dismissing the minority owners out there, and there are plenty of them. And they're often the ones, if you look at historically, they've been the ones that have had the least access to capital. So they are the ones buying the most affordable property. So, You're going to destroy minority ownership, minority wealth creation. And I'm just hoping, and I'm willing to have the conversation. It's not a comfortable conversation to have for most. It's a lot that people stay away from. Like, they're like, you're a lightning rod to try to touch it. But I think it's a conversation too important not to have. And I'm willing to raise my voice. And thankfully, other people are raising their voices about it as well. And that's where I think it's going to go. I think it's going to have to be a big fiery mess before it's really going to get the attention that it deserves. And hopefully at that point, not too many people have become that collateral damage, like you mentioned, and we can start the healing process on putting this back together with accountability for both sides of the equation and create healthier communities because of it.
Well, I'll just add one thing. I don't believe, maybe I'm naive, and maybe it does exist to a certain level as far as looking at landlords and housing providers in the way of white landlords or whatever the case is. I think it's more of a class
Totally
approach. I think it's a financial thing. I think it's the fact that have and have nots. Meanwhile, they don't look at the big picture and they don't have a full understanding. How many small landlords do you know personally that are living in much worse conditions than the actual tenants that they house? Because I know plenty of them, because they did everything they can to be able to get that deposit. And it doesn't matter what they are, white, black, purple, green,
totally,
whatever the case is. They did everything they can to scrimp and scrape and get that deposit and to reach their dream. They bought a property, but that property is full of debt that they have to pay back at one point. And not only does it have a lot of debt that's on there, they have a lot of maintenance costs and fees that they have to pay. And at the same time, they have the taxes that they have to deal with. And they have an overbearing government that refuses to help them in any way do the right thing for the property.
Or even if not help them, just not hurt them.
Yeah, well, that's true. Now, those people, in many cases, they're working blue collar jobs. They're doing everything they can to keep saving, whatever the case. And many times they don't have enough to be able to sustain. And what they do is they bring down their level of living significantly. It's not unheard of for a landlord or a small landlord that's first starting out for the first few years to be trying to survive off of baked beans and off of cans of tuna fish just to be able to survive. And in a lot of cases, they'll deprive their own families of things that they really need and really want just to be able to keep that asset and that investment that they made afloat. But they don't look at that from that perspective. They basically look at how the tenant is living. Well, if you take the flip side, many of these tenants that are living in these units, and many of the ones that are not paying, are working in very well-paid jobs.
Sure.
You might not have that as much as you have it in some of the units that you're working, because I know that you're working with a certain type of more affordable housing. Sure. But in the city, you definitely have it. And what we call them are professional tenants. You have a guy or a woman that is making $250,000, $300,000, but they are very well read and they really know the system and they know how to play the system very well. And they hop from apartment to apartment and basically burning landlord one after the other. And they're living in a much better position and shape than what that landlord that is up to their neck in debt.
Sure.
Trying to put a roof over that tenant's house ahead.
Well, I've been investing. I've been selling real estate. This is going into I'm pretty sure it's my 8th year. I was trying to figure that out this morning, actually. And but I've been buying rental property for about 5. Like my business partner and I, we jokingly say that it's a full-time volunteer activity. Like, we're not taking income out of it. We put some money out. Put some money into it. We bought some stuff. We rolled, we cashed out, did a refinance, and then, kind of that method, right? Buy something, do a cash out refi, take the money, put it back in, buy another one. Like, our goal was like, let's grow this thing. So it's been a volunteer activity. There's been plenty of times that it's cost me money because I've got to put gas in my truck to run around and pick up rents and things like that, or go out and take the time, hey, I can't get the contractor to go do what needs to be done. And there's a problem. We got to jump in the truck and go do it. And I don't get compensated for that time. And I'm not begrudging that. I mean, that was my choice. I said, let's volunteer for the first couple of years. Let's try to grow this thing. And then, 6, 7, 8 years into it, we can start to, maybe start to take some income out of it. And then just about the point where you get to where you think, okay, it's about time that we can maybe we can slow down a little bit. Let's maybe take a little income. And then boom, the moratorium hits. And now not only am I volunteering, but I'm going backwards. So I'm like, I'm not an independently wealthy guy. I can't afford to subsidize housing for people. So it's like, if the rents aren't coming in, then, what do you do? So it's a little disheartening to now turn around and start to sell some of it off. But it's like, okay, you got to look at the properties that you've got equity in, say, okay, if I sell that, pull the equity, then I can shore up the taxes on this and take care of this over here. And at least that's stabilized for a little while. But most of the housing providers I know, the first several years, it's a total volunteer activity, because they're trying to be long cycle.
How dare you not want to subsidize your services and finances for housing?
Yeah, I'm a greedy guy, I guess. So yeah, it's I'm hoping that now that there's enough pain in this community of housing providers, that now the voices are being heard, and I'm willing to dedicate some hours per week in volunteering to try to spread the message, because I think it's an important issue, and it's having more voices at the table is better, whether I agree with all of them or not. And I certainly won't. And I'm sure not everybody will agree with me and what I maybe advocate for individually, or my approach on a particular portion of the topic. But I think these are conversations that are worth having. And I'm hoping that by having them, that it alerts more people to saying that this is an issue that needs attention. And there's a very select group of people that can bring that attention to fruition. And that's, the legislative bodies and, the executives of these, whether the individual municipalities or the state itself.
Well, the number one thing is to get the most amount of attention. And every time we do something like what we're doing right now, brings more attention to this, to the table, to more people.
Sure.
What you've been doing on a personal level, putting out those videos, have dramatically helped get people's attention. I've been doing everything I can from the radio show, putting it out there and speaking not only on the internet platform, but to those people that don't go onto the internet, wherever they can, to just be heard. And I keep saying this to everybody: we need to have more and more people involved, because the truth be said, the media goes for the ratings. They go for the story that's basically going to get them the most attention, and the one that's going to be the more dramatic one. And it's usually coming from the tenant's point of view. So that's why whenever you're doing a Google search and you're doing a random type of search wherever, on whatever platform, and you put in something like the eviction moratorium, or you're putting something in like cancel rent, or you're putting in something along the lines of even landlord rights, what comes up more than like all the way to the top? It's all about people pleading against landlords and villainizing them and making and demonizing us in a way where it's not right. And I've been doing everything I can to get more people from the here from the YouTube community to be talking about it. And some people have been talking about it. Matthew Lyman has been a real big advocate. He does some terrific videos as well. And he's a good watch too. He's interesting when you're watching him.
I've had a good couple conversations with him. Yeah, the media wants to focus on, they want to focus on the person who's just about to get thrown out of the house. They're not there to talk and offer any assistance along the way. They'll get right there at the moment of, the breaking point. And they want to talk about that. They want to talk about the dirtbag landlords, which there are plenty. Believe me, I know. It's part of the reason I started buying the inner city stuff. Is I was like, I could do this better than what these guys are doing. These guys are running it like a total dump. And people should be living in better conditions than this. Yeah, the people that they're ignoring are minority landlords, immigrant landlords. The other group of people that are really getting hurt by a lot of this are people that are in multi-unit dwellings where you've got a good tenant that's being impacted by bad behavior of another tenant, and they're begging for the landlord to do something about it. And the landlord says, I can't. I mean, in some of my rooming houses, I've had some real disaster situations over the last year, and I've got people saying, can you please get rid of them? And I'm like, actually, no, I can't get rid of them. I'm sorry that they're dealing drugs, they're prostituting, they're, inviting 12 people over to hang out in their room and party every Friday night till 4 a.m. I would love to get rid of that person. I legally have no ability to do so. So the media doesn't rush out to talk to the good tenants. And a lot of the times those good tenants are afraid to tell their story because there might be criminal activity or taking place in a next door property, right? They rent a single family, and next door they're dealing drugs and partying until 5 a.m. And they're like, hey, landlord, can you do something about it? Nope, I legally can't. It doesn't matter what the reason is. I can't evict this person. I have no recourse. So once again, a lot of good people are being hurt, and those stories aren't being told. But I think they're worth telling, and it's kind of the next step of some of what I'm going to try doing with some of my video is to start to bring, much like we're doing here, is to start to have some of these mini or smaller, shorter conversations with other people to say, how is this impacting you? Tell your story, and let me be a vehicle to get that story out, because it's important to be heard.
And that's the biggest thing that I'm coming across as an obstacle. A lot of people are genuinely afraid to put themselves up publicly to speak about this.
Totally.
And I understand the reservations. I understand. I don't want my tenant to see me and do some even worse thing. Isn't that a horrible position to have, where you're actually afraid to say what's really happening because that person that's doing it to you will just do worse to you? And that's basically what I'm getting from a lot of people. And I understand that, but I also don't understand the mindset of, okay, it's better to be silent about it. Because if you're silent about it and you're not making any noise about it, you're basically going to have a scenario where you're never going to get anything done, or all you're going to get is like, something to appease you in a little way, and to basically, here, take this and shut up and go away, kind of a thing. And that's basically what we've been getting all along the lines from the officials. Like, okay, you don't like 0% increases if you have stabilized units, we'll give you 0.5 point or 1% for a 2-year lease. Like, come on, it's enough. Enough is enough. And I'm pleading with landlords and people that are affected in any way. And they don't even have to be a landlord. I mean, look at the restaurant owners, what they're going through right now. Look at all these small business owners, what they're going through. They're all in the same boat with us on different levels. They're being dramatically affected in many different ways. And I'm asking for everybody to help advocate for us in any possible way. And that's why I said I've been reaching out to the YouTube community, because all the big guys that have the millions of viewers that are out there, they're more concerned about keeping their reputation clean and not touching something that's controversial like this and selling their seminars, rather than actually talking about something that's a community service. And like myself, you have a personal stake and a personal belief in what you're speaking about. And I don't know about you, but I've lost a ton of subscribers since I started talking about it. I get like the nasty talks, the nasty tweets that come back to me on Twitter. I've lost tons of followers on Twitter, and that's okay, because I don't need them. I'd rather have a smaller core audience that believes in what I say. And if it takes getting one person a day or one person at a time to join the effort and understand and be on the same page where I am, that's okay with me too, because I rather be speaking to audience that are receptive to what I'm saying, rather than just clicking like or subscribe on any channel. So the only big channel that actually has taken themselves into a position of actually talking about this more and actually taking action in a different way and helping people by guiding them is the bigger podcast.
Bigger Pockets or whatever it's called.
Yeah, they're actually done a lot of things to help. So I'm glad that they at least they're involved, and hopefully some people that are watching this right now are actually gonna get themselves more involved. Maybe they'll get embarrassed that I just called them out. I don't know, whatever it takes.
Well, and I'll leave you this. I'm looking at the time, and I've got to bounce in a minute. my attorney's waiting to hear from me. I just saw me a text message, call me. But so, one thing I was actually going to say, almost to the contrary to that I've been heartened by is, I mean, I don't have much of a following on YouTube. I've kind of used it to play around with video. I've kind of made it my mission that I'm going to really try to triple down on video this next year and really embrace it. I'm trying to, learning new editing stuff and all that, and brought on
You're getting there though.
Yeah, I'm getting there. It's slow but sure. I'm probably enough to be dangerous at this point. But one of the things is I have found is just putting these things out is what I've been very pleased with is how many people have reached out to say thank you for being a voice for it, because it's like they want to say something, but they don't know where, what the venue should be or who to say it to, or they just assume it's not going to make a difference. And so, I mean, even other real estate agents that are investors as well are coming up to me and saying, hey, thanks a bunch for what you're doing. I really appreciate it. Now, some people are saying, I'm afraid to comment on it. I'm afraid to like it, but thank you very much for what you're doing. And I'm also hearing from tenants as well saying, thank you for saying, this is stuff that needs to be talked about. Yes, there's another side of this equation. Not all tenants are downtrodden and abused by their housing providers. Some of us have worked hand in hand with our housing providers for years. I've run into rough times and my housing providers extended me, courtesy or, hey, don't worry about it. Keep the extra $50 this month. Just, get the kid diapers, so I'm hearing all of these other stories that are coming out of people saying, thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for kind of building that chorus of voices. And I do think it's going to help build some momentum over time. And it's like, let's face it, we've all been relatively negligent on putting these stories and these issues out there because we're so busy, focused on trying to make sure that the pro formas look good and the numbers work and that the maintenance issues are taken care of, filling vacancies and oftentimes, even as housing providers, we take on additional, we become counselors and we're, sounding boards for people in the challenges that they have in life. That side of the story doesn't get seen ever, and it's certainly never something the media talks about. So I'm optimistic. I'm that humans are going to find a way to continue to connect with each other and stay, resolved on trying to make sure that we have healthy communities, and we do need healthy housing in order to promote healthy communities. And I think that it's a valiant effort, and I'm willing to continue to add to it. And we should do this again soon.
Absolutely. I definitely appreciate everything you're doing, and I appreciate you.
Same to you.
I'm going to see you on the 18th, I'm assuming, or no?
Yeah, I'm actually going to be. I'm going to be in New York. My wife's got to come down and renew her passport at the Thai embassy, and so I said to her, "Hey, what do you think about in the next week's summer, winter recess or whatever up here?" I feel like they've been on winter recess since September, but so my daughter's out of school next week, so we said, "Well, we're going to come down, see a couple friends." And she's going to hit up the embassy. And I was like, well, if we're going to be there, I'm going to try to make it over on the 18th. What's it? It's Gracie Mansion, correct?
Yep.
Gracie. So we'll definitely have to catch up in person. I'll be the guy with the mask on. So, but I appreciate your time, Nick, and I look forward to meeting you in person next week.
Absolutely. You want to give everybody a way to be able to contact you in case they wanted to send you their stories?
Yeah, sure. The easiest way to find me is my website, richtyson.com. It's RICHTYSON.com. On there, you can find me, phone call, email, any, social media of your choosing. I'm probably involved in it. So yeah, any way that they want to reach out. I am going to try to start hosting some conversations here over the next several days of, I've got kind of a quick questionnaire that I kind of want to run through a ton of different, housing providers with and kind of get everybody's individual story, but kind of the similar format. So if anybody wants to participate in that, I would love to have a nice diverse group of voices to contribute to that and start to get these stories out there that maybe aren't getting heard already.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rich. And we're going to catch up soon. And hopefully on the next podcast, we'll actually be able to get it running from the get-go and not having a ton of sound issues. But
no, I appreciate it, Nick. And enjoy the weekend, and I'll see you next week.
Sounds great. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, bud. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So that was Rich Tyson, and thank you again for joining us today. I know that he definitely has a lot of input and definitely a lot of great thoughts as far as how to be able to tackle this eviction moratorium, and as far as approaching landlord rights. He's been a great advocate, and I know that he's going to continue to be a great advocate going forward. Thank you again for joining us. I'll put down his information down below, but again, his website is richtyson.com. and hopefully we'll have another great roundtable coming soon. Thanks to everybody for watching, and apologies again for all the major problems that we had as far as the beginning. The sound was horrible, but we're getting there. We're learning the technology. See you all next week at Gracie's Mansion.